This week, we start our discussion on qualitative methods, and this says this week, week 13, qualitative methods, part 1, and next week, week 14, we'll say part 2. And quite honestly, you might say to yourself, oh, we're squishing in quite a few chapters here at the very end, the last 3 weeks of qualitative research, and we have spent essentially 12, probably 11, because we talked about action research, which is qualitative in nature, and we also talked about evaluation research, which can be a little bit of a mix. But really, at least 11 weeks we've been spending on quantitative methods. Now, the reason for that, and it's probably the reason for the bigger part of your text to be dedicated to that, is because in education we rely heavily on quantitative research and their results to point us in one direction, and we use that to make our decisions, quantitative research. But qualitative research does some things differently, as you're going to discover through the reading. It does some things differently by putting things in perspective, looking at them through a different lens, and really asking more probing type of questions like why, trying to understand some different points of view, both from participants and from the researchers and observers. So we're going to begin talking a little bit about that, and I by no means want to diminish the value of qualitative research. It's just that in education, we rely much more on quantitative. In addition to that, quantitative research has some, as you have found out, statistical tools that take some time to understand before you can interpret them as findings. So these last few weeks, hopefully most of the methodologies will make sense to you. After case studies and ethnography, I think things will really be very easy for you to understand. But I want to go through these last few weeks so you can kind of get it in your mind how this is all going to be wrapped up in the next 3 weeks. So part 1 here, which is going to be covering chapter 13, that's case studies. I'm going to spend more time on that because of all the qualitative methods, case studies are the ones that are most oftentimes used in education. So you'll see that one quite a bit. And when we get to the chapter on mixed methods, which is week 15, we'll spend all of our time on mixed methods and how you use quantitative and the qualitative ones that you'll take a cursory view of in the middle together. So let's take a look at the objectives really quick and just a kind of quick overview of the last 3 weeks of this course. Essentially, you're going to be describing the characteristics of case studies. You're going to describe the criteria that can be used to evaluate the quality and rigor of a case study. You're going to do the reading this week for chapter 13. There are, my video will appear here in just a moment. There is no discussion this week, and this is to allow more time for your final papers or proposals. Those should be actually pretty well in hand as you've had your topic now for some time. Hopefully you've either gathered the articles that you're going to review or you have really thought through what you're doing for a proposal, and you should have your draft ready to go. And I will talk about that in a moment because I have pretty high expectations for how that's going to get done with the peer review and edits and so forth. You'll do the quiz for chapter 13, which is all on case studies. And then here's a reminder of the draft of your final paper. And there'll be notifications sent to you through Canvas about doing your peer review, and then just reminding you about the date of the final project. Move ahead if we take a quick look, because there will be no video next week at week 14. I call this part 2. It's not part 2 of a video. There will be no video this week. No video. This will be commingled with the week 13 video, which you are watching right now, providing you with more time again to do your peer reviews. So this week there are a few other objectives that I'll talk about, but notice the readings. 13, you might be saying, oh my gosh, chapters 14, 15, and 16, that's a pretty big pile of reading. What I've done is I've broken it down. Chapter 14 on ethnography, that one has a few more pages, but you can see just a few pages on narratives and a few pages on historical research. So it's actually pretty small, and it's just to give you a flavor for that qualitative design. So when you see it in the literature, you say to yourself, oh, I've seen that before. And you may have to go look it up, but at least it's somewhat familiar to you. So it's really to get you familiar with some terminology in a different type of way. That we can gather some, and I hesitate to say data, some sort of narrative or story, some content, if you will, to explain a phenomena. More about that in just a moment. There will also be no discussion in week 14. There'll be a quiz on these chapters on the pages that you read. It's fairly short, and it's just primarily to check that you got some of the big main broad stroke concepts and a little bit of vocabulary from those chapters. And again, the reminder about doing your peer review, and then that your final projects are due. the last week, we can take a quick look at that, will be the final chapter, chapter 17. I've put the page numbers there. That's essentially the entire chapter. And explain the usefulness of mixed methods research, identify the characteristics of quantitative and qualitative. As I've mentioned, we'll be then talking about how you integrate those two together. And I will have a short video posted here soon. We'll have a final discussion on qualitative research in general. On week 15, you'll be taking a quiz on chapter 17, and then you'll have your final project proposal with all the changes from your peer review submitted by April 27th. And that will take me a while to read, as I have to sign final grades out within the next several days after that. So that's an overview of the last 3 weeks. Some final comments on your final paper, whether you've decided to do a critique or proposal. These are some things I want you to try and remember, and it will make the process go a lot smoother here at the very end. But make sure you proofread yourself. I would read it out loud if you have to see if the sentences make sense to you, if things are clear. And then ask someone else to proofread it before you submit your draft for peer review. The person reading your article in this, or your paper in this class, should not be the first person to look at this, because what happens is your eyes are seeing one thing and somebody else's eyes see something completely different. So I highly recommend, to make this process a little bit easier, is that you read it, you give somebody else an opportunity to read it and give you some feedback and talk to you about any kind of errors they see or things they don't understand, or grammatical problems. And if they know APA, that's even a bigger bonus, before you submit it for peer review. Peer review is April 17th. Make sure you're checking for grammar, incomplete sentences, and APA. Incomplete sentences are something that I find a lot from students submitting articles. So make sure you read them all the way, and if it's like, where was I going with that? Make sure you make it a complete sentence and put it together correctly grammatically, and obviously checking for spelling and punctuation as well. After you submit your paper, all of you do, when it's due on April 17th, on April 18th, Canvas will send a notification out saying there's a paper for you to review. These are being done by random assignment that Canvas is doing, so I have no way of knowing which one you're going to get until it actually takes place. And then you'll be able to go in and download that individual's paper and conduct your peer review. I would like you to submit back to that person a document that has track changes and comments that you have. And also, I'd like you to submit back to them the completed rubric, so they can see where it's specifically what you thought about the elements that are required in that paper. So those are the two things going back. If you don't have Word or have a problem getting Word to work, let me know, and we'll try and figure out a way through Google Docs to get it set up, or maybe through PDF. But I'm pretty sure all of you have Word. And if you haven't used the track changes tool or comments, it's actually, there's a small learning curve, and it'll take you a minute, but you should be able to pull down some options there to see the kinds of things that you need to do for a track change. So Canvas notification will come out, and you'll be ready to go to start your peer review. Peer review then will be due on April 23rd. Announcement will come to you on the 18th. You'll have a few days, 5 days or so, to read that paper, make comments, and get it back. The peer reviews, after I see that those have been conducted, people who did a good, thorough job will receive full credit. Make sure you check for grammar, incomplete sentences, and APA. These are the things that I'm going to check for, and it just is so difficult when I'm reading your final paper if I have to do all of that work instead of a paper taking me maybe 45 minutes to go through, read, and critique. It could take, I had a paper take me once as long as 2 hours. That's way too much time when you got a bunch of students in a class, and also it usually means that I can't really understand the project that you're doing. Again, do some editing and read it closely. It is part of the rubric as well, and you will get both. You should get scored down in both the peer review, and you will see a score in the rubric that I submit back to you on that paper as well. Peer reviewers, do a thorough critical review. Not doing so could result in points lost for completing the peer review. In other words, don't just get it and say, oh, this guy's my buddy, he's my good friend, or I really like what she posted in the discussions. I'm sure Dr. Spillmaker will know exactly what she's talking about. No, do a very thorough critical review. And that doesn't mean that you're mean and saying stuff like, where'd you learn to write? You don't need to say stuff like that, but that you're saying, I really don't understand what you're saying here. This needs clarification. This is a sentence that doesn't tie back into what your statement is above. all of that kind of thing. You need to give a very thorough critical review, and hopefully if the draft was looked at by somebody else, it'll make that job go a lot faster. So do a good review. If you don't understand something, keep looking at the rubric and make sure that you give some good feedback to that person so that they can make their final changes. That paper will then come back to you on, hopefully the peer reviews will be done by the 23rd, and you have a few days then to make the final changes based on your peer reviewers' comments before you submit the paper to me on April 27th.